and see all the discussion. I said at the start that you all could ask questions any time. I just said I'm also going to ask some questions as well. Could a couple of people tell me, could a few people tell me, I've got another microphone that can come down, so it would be good to have some, or start off by someone with a loud voice telling me what they think a child-safe parish looks like and what we have to do to create it.
Many of the children-based activities are based on some kind of class, and it's very important not only for the safety of the children, but particularly for safety of the adult involved, that there's more than one adult present in the classroom or in the room or the hall. And it is very dangerous for the sake of the person to be on their own in any kind of situation like this. So really in parishes, they need to make certain, or we need to make certain, that we have at least 2 adults in any of these activities, whether they're youth group or whether they're classes, and so on and so forth.
Yep, that is one rule that we push very strongly, which is the rule of never having an adult alone with a child. Thanks.
How does that apply in schools? Teachers only by themselves?
Schools don't fall under our policy. You will have the teacher by themselves, but nowadays usually schools are fairly open environments. So people can, classrooms are fairly open environments, so people will be able to, from outside, will be able to see what's happening. But for the purposes of parishes though, we certainly have that rule of never having an adult alone with a child.
Also, children should never be allowed to visit anyone alone. They should always be in groups. And there should also be a little class for every kids in the primary school level. What is a good touch and what is a bad touch?
Yes, so that is very similar to them having adults alone, and also teaching children and empowering children to be able to know what is child safety and knowing the reasons behind this.
Ensuring that, because I'm a youth leader, ensuring that every individual in here has either a police check within the past 2-3 years, obviously, also working with children check, but also code of conduct, a viable code of conduct that is made for this parish, because like the lady in the video said, they do have a very broad range, but it's easily narrowable to the needs of our parish. So ensuring that a risk assessment code of conduct is made for this parish. Every single person that volunteers, regardless, should read it and probably sign it as well so they understand it. And ensuring every person in this room does it regardless if they're in contact with children or not. And also I was thinking having a, what's it called? A class for those who are in direct contact with children, whether it be children ministry, youth ministry, in any place, they have a little bit extra training on what their obligations are as a leader for the children or as someone who's in contact with children. Would be great.
Okay, I think I might get you to come down front and give us a presentation with me. That's great. We're going to touch on a lot of those things later. Sorry, what's your name?
Nikki.
Nikki, okay. But yes, I will connect with a lot of those things later.
Hi. I think one of the most important things is education in the parish. First of all, we need to do a complete risk assessment before you can look at anything else, and then to educate the people. And you mentioned that But working with children doesn't necessarily pick up somebody who's done something wrong but hasn't been committed. So I think just working with children, is it sufficient, or do we need to look more closely, particularly to our leaders who are obviously leading the parish and looking after our children?
Yep. So certainly, a working with children check is a bit like a driver's license. If I don't have a driver's license, you probably don't want me driving the church bus. But just because I've got the driver's license, I might still be a terrible driver who goes through red lights and hasn't had their, you know. Yeah. So it's a first step, but it's not the only step. Okay. We get maybe another couple of.
Reporting. We're gonna have, who do you report to if there is something, if there is a problem? Do we have a body that we report to, or, I don't think that the parish priest is the only one who would have to be, be spoken to about some things that have happened in the parish, right? So we're gonna have somebody to actually report it to. The reason being, when you go to, when there is a problem, you say to someone, we need to talk about this, they say, oh, once he's on so, or once he's on so. It is, it's not very definite. There's not a definite body you can go report to. So reporting the parish should have some sort of a reporting body.
Yep, we'll get onto that one very shortly as well. Okay, maybe get one. Does anybody else? Okay.
Yes, I think the most important thing here is we must listen to the children. And children should be taught this too. So we're all taught, we're learning about how to do this, but children must be made aware of this so that they can spot the dangers, if any dangers occur, and they're ready to go and see their teacher or somebody else in authority. So I think listen to the children.
Good. After speaking, the picture there strikes me as very helpful because it's an open forum, and I think that wherever possible, the open forum and certainly, teamwork and having travelled a little bit recently, it's very common nowadays for children to come up for the Our Father and the Other. It's very open, it's very safe, and it's just a wonderful forum, and I think there are a number of mechanisms that we can use socially that protect us all, and they're very healthy.
Thank you. Okay. We'll focus. So continuing on, we have a look at the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards and what we'll go back to those points that we will make very shortly. You all should have or be sharing with someone the handout with the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards, and I think what people have said and connect to the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards. National Catholic Safeguarding Standards are important because they will really be driving how Catholic parishes all around Australia do child safety in the future. One of the good things about them is that they are national, so often in Australia you'll end up with different things happening in different parts of Australia. State-based system where everything seems to be a little bit different, but for the Catholic Church in Australia, there'll be the same level of child safety across Australia. So, as I think everyone will have read through, I was going to say spend a minute reading through them, but I think everyone's actually read through them by now. And we will watch a video that shows, made by Catholic Professional Standards, that shows the thinking behind the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards.
How would you now define a child-safe institution?
A child-safe institution is one that thinks and acts in the interest of that child. That is, you ask yourself over and over again, are the decisions we're making, are the actions we're taking in the genuine interest of the child? What we've seen in previous institutions was that there was an assumption. An assumption because we work with children, we are therefore by nature a child safe institution. And the community believed it. You know, child protection agencies accepted that. And what we've discovered isn't. The fact that you work with children, you shouldn't assume that you're actually acting in their interest. And so from the boardroom to the basement, from everybody that's involved in that institution, including parents and children, need to be engaged with a single focus, and that is acting in the best interest of the children, acting in a safe way. It's about culture, it's about attitude, it's about decision making, and it's about practices and procedures. But ultimately that's the final question. Are we an institution that acts in the best interest of children and their safety? I think everybody would have assumed the church would have acted in the best interest of children. And yet at the end of the day, we saw example after example where the reputation of the church, the favouring of people that were known and believed in, took precedence over that. So history is very important if we're going to get the future right.
So one of the requirements of the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards is that every parish has a safeguarding committee that is responsible for building child safety within the parish. This parish is in the process of setting up the safeguarding committee, and the committees have a number of responsibilities. The first is promoting child safety within their community and fostering understanding the importance of child safety. This photo here is actually a really good example. This was at St Raphael's in West Preston on their feast day. That one of the ways they've decided to promote child safety is that on their feast day, after Father Simon gave the homily, he asked all the volunteers to come up the front, and then he read out a commitment to child safety document. While he was reading the document, the volunteers went up one by one to sign their names to that document that they were committed to child safety. Once they finished, Father Simon asked the rest of the congregation, do you also commit to child safety? And they all said yes. Father Simon said, I can't hear you. They all shouted yes. And that meant that it sort of embedded child safety by tying it to the feast day of St Raphael. The Child Safety Committee has to work collaboratively across the whole parish to have a culture of child safety, just going back to the video that we just watched. The safeguarding committees have to implement, maintain and review child safety processes and procedures. Someone was talking about you were talking about doing risk assessments. So that is part of the role of the Child Safety Committee, is to do the risk assessments or work with other people to make sure they happen. Really good example of this is at St James Apostle in Hobbs Crossing North, where every time they have a youth group activity, they do a risk assessment of activity. And it's actually the youth who do the risk assessment. They get assistance with it, but it's the youth who do the risk assessment before they do an activity. So that's a really good example of doing risk assessment. Also a really good example of involving youth with someone, empowering youth that someone else was talking about. A really good example actually from St James Apostle in Hobbs Crossing North is the way they've empowered the youth. They had a new assistant priest come to the parish, and within a few hours of arriving, 3 youth had called up Father Jude to tell them that there was a strange man hanging around the presbytery and they might want to call the police. Which also comes back to involving children and young people in the in decision making, educating them about the reason why things happened. A couple of weeks ago, I was at Sacred Heart in St Albans, and they were telling me about how they have the rule in the sacristy when the old service get changed, the door is never ever closed, and the old service have had it, taught that the door is never closed. And I asked them, but do the children actually know why it is that the door was never closed. And the sacristan said, well, actually, maybe they don't actually know. They know that I'm a bit paranoid about it, but they may not actually know the reason behind it. So he was going to talk to them about the reason. The role of the Safeguarding Committee is also going back to Louis Dad was saying that ensuring that the reporting mechanisms for reporting complaints or concerns are really well communicated across the parish. At the moment, Professional Standards Unit is they're working on a poster that parishes can then a template for a poster that parishes can put their own information into, but explaining the processes for who you discuss concerns with. So always you can discuss concerns with the parish priest, parish secretary or the pastoral associate, or in the case of St Catherine Siena, the deacon is another person you can discuss it with. Usually we will want a couple of contact details of a couple of members of the Safeguarding Committee that people can talk to. The other thing though is that you can always get a phone and call 000 and talk to the police. If abuse is occurring within a family setting, you can talk to the Department of Health and Human Services, Child Protection. You can also call Professional Standards Unit and talk to us about concerns you have or if there's a complaint. And depending on what the complaint is, it will be appropriate to talk to some of those people. One thing we'd like to emphasise is the days when the Catholic Church said don't talk to the police are over. Always feel free to call the police and discuss concerns with them. Another responsibility of the Safeguarding Committee is to do what we're doing today, which is to attend training and be educated ourselves. And a very important responsibility of the Safeguarding Committee is to monitor compliance with National Catholic Safeguarding Standards. A couple of really important points to make. One is that the Safeguarding Committee doesn't investigate abuse. If there are allegations of abuse, some members of it may be, involved in that in some way and be contact people. But one of the jobs of the Safeguarding Committee is not actually to investigate abuse. That is the role of the police and within the Catholic Church, the Professional Standards Unit. Another point we made, because we've sometimes been asked about this, is that if a Safeguarding Committee acts in good faith, it is not going to be, it's not liable for litigation. We've heard of people who say, I don't want to be on the Safeguarding Committee because if something goes wrong, I might be sued. Has anybody here seen any of those 60-minute videos about churches in America where they have snake handling? Yeah. If the Safeguarding Committee was to bring snakes into the church, do something like that, the bets about the litigation are off. So long as the Safeguarding Committee acts in good faith, acts in a reasonable manner, the members of the Safeguarding Committee are not at risk of legal action. The National Catholic Safeguarding Standards, Standard 5, and the Victorian Child Safe Standards, Standard 4, require organisations to have robust human resource management procedures, which includes the screening, supervision and training for both paid staff and volunteer staff. And we know that in the past, Catholic parishes have been very good at screening or supervising their paid staff, but not always so good with the volunteers. With volunteers, it's often very informal, that if you stick your hand up, you're going to get chosen for whatever you stuck your hand up, and you're also chosen for everything else that you didn't stick your hand up for. When I became a Catholic at Easter Vigil, Father John Paul said something to me in Latin. I'm starting to suspect that actually what he said was, you have just volunteered for everything. So, in Catholic parishes, all clergy and staff and volunteers aged 18 and up are required to have either a Working with Children check or Victorian Institute of Teaching teacher registration if they're school teachers. Also, everyone who's got whether you've got the VIT or you've got a Working with Children check, you have to have St Catherine of Siena Parish listed as a volunteer organisation. And when you list them, the parish will receive a letter confirming that you've got a working with children check. All clergy and paid staff are required to have a police check as well. For volunteers, this is volunteers who are in a decision-making capacity, such as parish council, or volunteers who handle money who are required to have a police check. So if it is a finance council, they would have to have it. Counters have to have police checks. Collectors don't have to have police checks. Going into the future, that volunteers will be required to do annual safeguarding essentials course we're still working on. That will be the same for all parishes. It will be the same around Australia, so there will be that universal standard around Australia. New and current volunteers have to sign a code of conduct annually, so Vicky, thank you for that. And going into the future, new volunteers will need to be interviewed first and have referee checks and do an induction. So when I first went to St Andrews in Werribee, I think I'd been there a couple of weeks, and there was a little note in the bulletin saying that they needed volunteers for children's liturgy. So I sent an email to the parish office saying that I wanted to take a volunteer in children's liturgy. They later told me that they were desperate for volunteers. I joined the RCA program at that time, and I'd been there a few weeks. I said, Father John Paul knows me. So the woman who runs children's liturgy went to Father John Paul and said that, I put him down as the referee. Father John Paul said that, presumably that I'm a wonderful guy, but he also said, Martin's only been around a few weeks, we don't know him that well. No, we are not going to use him as a volunteer in children's liturgy, which was a very good decision to make. Next semester, they asked for volunteers again. I once again sent an email saying I want to volunteer in children's liturgy. Father John Paul knows me, and I saw later on that at this time he said, well, actually, I don't know if he said I was a wonderful guy, but he said, yes, we do know him, and yes, he is trusted. We can now trust him to do children's liturgy. So going to the future, doing those referee checks, having an interview. Interview doesn't have to be formal, but it has to, talk to people about why they want to volunteer in a particular ministry. With the induction, another good, St James Apostle in Hoppers Crossing North is a really good example that they, twice a year they run induction where they talk about child safety. Volunteers from most ministries have to do that induction when it comes up. The exception is volunteers in youth ministry or children's liturgy. They're not allowed to start before they've done that child safety induction. With the working with children checks, they are important. We know that in some parishes people are questioning why they have to have them, and I think what we've said is part of the reason, but there are penalties around doing volunteering without working with children checks. If you do what the working with children legislation defines as child-related work or volunteer work without a check, there's the potential for the person who's for that volunteer, there's potential for up to 2 years in jail and a fine of up to $39,000. One thing that's important to note is that the requirements for volunteers in religious organisations are broader under the Working with Children Check legislation than most volunteer organisations. For the organisation, if they have a volunteer who has to have a Working with Children check, who doesn't, there's the potential for the head of organisation to do 2 years in jail, and there's a fine of up to $198,000. I'm sure that Father Richard loves you all very much and would be willing to do 2 years in jail for a good reason, but willing to suffer for his faith, but not having a Working with Children check is probably not one of those reasons that Father Richard would be willing to go to jail. So with Working with Children check, yes, they obviously protect children, but they also protect the volunteer, they protect the parish, and they protect Father Richard, which is important. So volunteers have to sign a code of conduct annually, and so we're going to be going through the code of conduct. Dick and Chris, did you want me to talk to that code of conduct now, or are you going to talk to that?
We have the parish one. You can do the Archdiocese.
So the Archdiocese one and the parish one are the same. So you'll be signing a code of conduct shortly. But when you look at the code of conduct, it will come back to two things that we've talked about today. One is that, of course, it will tell you that you're not to engage in any form of child abuse. Things that will seem fairly common sense. Avoid any form of physical punishment. Ensure that physical contact is appropriate. So these are some of the things we'll be committing to. But a lot of the code of conduct is about what we've talked about, creating safe environments. One thing is that, sorry, I don't know your name, but you're saying never be alone with a child. One of the things you agree to in the code of conduct is if you're never alone with a child, and you don't try to seek situations where you can be alone with children. Ensure that photographs or video of children are taken with consent of parents or guardians, and that social media is used appropriately. I can see that your parish has youth group has a Facebook page that is set up in an appropriate manner, so that's another thing that Vicky will know about. And there's some other things too, basically around creating safe environments. And that is an annual requirement. Why do you have to do it annually? The reason is, firstly, it's a reminder of what is important. Also, code of conducts can change. After I first got married 17 years ago, I was a youth leader in an Anglican parish, and I can't remember if I had to sign a code of conduct then, but in the code of conduct I would have signed then, I think there would have been nothing about social media, because 17 years ago, social media was just starting up. Also, there are things that have changed since then. So one of the things is that, things change, and also it's a good reminder at committing ourselves to the safety of children as an annual thing. Okay, questions and answers. Who has questions for me? Okay,
Hi, just a couple of questions though. First one is easy. What's the definition of a children? Because I've heard 16 years being said in your presentation before, but legally it's up to 18 years. 18 years above is termed as an adult. So I just need to know from that definition in terms of the code of conduct, what does child age represent? Second one is by actually having all volunteers sign the code of conduct, how can one actually assure that there is no abuse taking place in the church? As you said before, the working with children check is just equal to a driver's license. It doesn't assure anything of the sort. It's just a preliminary check. Code of conduct signing, does that mean it's from a legality point of view? So the parish and the Archdiocese can be held accountable, and the person signing the form is actually held accountable. So is it more from the legal point of view itself? Like the code of conduct is actually required to be signed annually, or is there actually any enforcement of the code of conduct that will also be explained later in the parish?
The answer is kind of yes, yes, and yes. So a child is anybody aged under 18. With the code of conduct, it has several. It does have several purposes. I mean, one, it does actually tell people what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, because don't take it for granted that people are necessarily going to know that. When I first became a leader, a youth leader in an Anglican parish, I don't recall anyone ever telling me that I couldn't have a relationship with any of the young women in the youth group. I just got married, so they may have assumed that, taken that for granted, but no, that was fine, and it was fine, but you don't necessarily want to take things for granted. One of the things in the code of conduct is that you won't drink alcohol, before, volunteering with children, and some people might not have thought about the fact that they might not have a beer before, the running youth group. So having that code of conduct can educate people. It is an accountability thing, that if something goes wrong and you're firing one of your volunteers, you might say, well, actually, you did sign a code of conduct saying that, you would do this and you have done this, or you wouldn't do that yet. And it also does give a degree of legal protection that if realistically, people will probably breach the code of conduct sooner or later. But it does kind of give that protection for the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese, when something goes wrong, which sadly eventually, something always goes wrong, the Archdiocese can say, well, actually, this volunteer did come to the induction, they did do that annual refresher, they signed a code of conduct, so they obviously knew they weren't supposed to do that, and they still went ahead and do it. The reality is that the Archdiocese will do everything it can to prevent abuse, but there are, limits. Next time I lead children's liturgy, there's nothing preventing me starting to whack children, for example. But I've signed a code of conduct that says that I will not do that, and I've been told that I will not do that. So, and in that case, wherever parish would say, well, we've actually done everything we possibly could to prevent the scenario of Martin smacking a child, and he still did it. So there is that protection there.
Martin, now there's a lot of checks and balances for individuals itself, for police check, walking returns check, and things like that, right? For our parish, we are, as an organization, does your section actually review whether the organization itself has all the checks and balances in place? And do you get the annual code of conduct for each parish as well?
We rely on the parish doing a lot of that. One thing that will almost certainly happen in the future is that we will sign a contract with Catholic Professional Standards Limited for them to start auditing parishes. They won't audit every parish, they will audit, maybe 10% of the parishes in the Archdiocese, and then they will publish a report, and it will be a public report on the outcome of that audit. We don't have a timeline yet of when we're going to sign the contract with them, and they'll start doing audits, but